You are broadcasting a signal right now. Not just when you pray, not just when you affirm, not just when you sit quietly and speak your desires into the air. You are broadcasting a signal in the moment the bills arrive and no one is watching. You are broadcasting a signal when your phone shows a balance that terrifies you, and you check it again, hoping the number has changed. The universe does not only hear what you ask for in your finest moments of faith, it responds to what you consistently transmit across all your moments, including the ones you would rather forget. One part of you orders abundance. Another part cancels the order with fear. This is the hidden architecture of your financial life, and Wallace Wattles saw it with complete clarity more than a century ago. He understood that the formless substance from which all wealth flows does not respond to occasional requests. It responds to dominant impressions. Your wealth may not be delayed by the source. It may not be delayed by fate, by circumstance, or by the closed doors you have been blaming. It may be delayed by a divided signal. And today, you are going to learn exactly what that means and exactly what to do about it. You affirm in the morning. You speak the words with intention and feeling, and for a moment, something inside you opens. Then afternoon comes, and the silence returns and the account has not changed, and a quiet panic begins to rise beneath the surface of your composure. You check the numbers. You calculate the shortfall. You run the arithmetic of what is owed and what is available, and how the distance between those two figures seems impossible to close. And by evening, the affirmation you spoke at dawn feels very far away, like something you said in a different life. You say you trust, but you plan with dread. You say the source provides, but you behave like supply is dying. You want increase, and that desire is real, and it is righteous. But beneath the desire, there is something older and more familiar. There is the emotional expectation of lack. There is the quiet belief, never spoken aloud, that things will probably not work out, that the good you are asking for is reserved for others, that your history is evidence of your limit. You pray with hope and plan for disaster. You speak wealth and feel poverty. You lift your eyes to abundance and then lower them back to the same familiar evidence that has always discouraged you. This is not a failure of character. This is a divided signal, and a divided signal is not a clear instruction. It is a contradiction being sent into the formless substance that makes up all material wealth. Here is what no one told you clearly enough. Wanting something is not the same as being aligned with it. Desiring abundance does not automatically create the signal that draws abundance toward you. You can desire wealth with great intensity, while your dominant emotional broadcast is the fear of not having it. You can say the right words every morning while your body lives in the feeling of scarcity every afternoon. You can speak of source providing, while your actions reveal that you believe the supply is unreliable and possibly already exhausted. The contradiction between what you speak and what you feel and what you expect is not a small inconsistency. It is the central spiritual error this teaching is designed to correct. Wallace Wattles did not write a book of gentle suggestions. He did not offer comfort without demand. The science of getting rich is a precise spiritual law laid out with the seriousness of a master who had studied poverty and prosperity not as economic categories, but as states of mind, states of signal, states of inner instruction. Wattles understood that the formless substance, the infinite supply from which all visible wealth is drawn, does not respond to need alone. It responds to the impression made upon it by the dominant mental and emotional state of the one who is seeking. He treated thought not as decoration. He treated thought as creative instruction, and instruction, to be effective, must be clear. The teaching we are entering today is built on one central truth that Wattles placed at the heart of his entire philosophy. You are always sending a signal. That signal is composed of your thought, your feeling, your speech, your expectation, and your action. When those 5 elements are unified and pointed in one direction, the signal becomes a clear command to the invisible field. Wealth begins to move. Channels begin to open. Opportunity begins to appear where before there seemed to be only silence and closed doors. But when those 5 elements are divided, when one speaks faith and another broadcasts fear, the signal becomes noise. And noise does not move wealth. Noise creates confusion in the very field from which your supply must come. This video will teach you the one wealth signal and how to stop canceling it. By the time this teaching is complete, you will understand not only what the signal is, but why you have been unconsciously interrupting it, what the canceling thought sounds like, how fear disguises itself as reason and realism, and what specific practice you can begin today to stabilize your signal and allow wealth to move toward you with the clarity and certainty it has always been capable of delivering. Wattles saw the way. He walked it. He taught it. And today, we interpret his law for the exact financial pain you are carrying right now. The visible world is very loud. It speaks constantly, and it speaks in numbers, bank balances, unpaid invoices, overdue notices, empty inboxes. No messages, no clients, no movement, no confirmation that anything is changing. The visible world presents its evidence with the confidence of absolute authority, and most people, even spiritually sincere people, allow that evidence to become the commander of their inner state. When the visible evidence looks good, the signal rises. When the visible evidence looks bad, the signal falls. The signal is never constant because the evidence is never constant. And so the inner instruction to the formless substance changes every day, sometimes every hour, in response to whatever the outer world is showing. This is the visible supply trap. It is the habit of allowing external conditions to define the internal signal. When the bank account looks healthy, you feel abundant. When it looks low, you feel scarcity. When a sale comes in, you feel trust. When 3 weeks pass without income, you feel forgotten. The signal does not come from within you, steady and unchanging. It comes from outside you, borrowed from whatever the morning's circumstances have decided to show. Wattles understood that this arrangement produces no consistent wealth. A signal that depends on visible evidence is not a signal. It is a reaction. And reactions create more of what they react to. Consider what happens when a bill arrives unexpectedly. The piece of paper or the notification on the screen becomes in that moment the commander of your inner world. Your throat tightens. Your breathing changes. Your mind immediately begins to calculate what is available versus what is owed. And in that calculation, the inner impression being sent to the formless substance is not one of wealth moving toward you. It is one of shortage closing in. The bill has redefined your signal. The visible world has won the argument. And you have unknowingly sent a clear instruction of lack into the same substance from which your supply must come. Past failure does the same work. Every time you remember a venture that did not succeed, an investment that did not return, a period of life when money seemed to vanish no matter what you tried, the emotional atmosphere of that memory enters your present signal. It does not stay in the past where it belongs. It reaches forward into your current broadcast and adds its weight of discouragement to what you are transmitting right now. You may be speaking the right words today, but you are feeling yesterday's defeats, and the substance responds to the dominant feeling more powerfully than it responds to the spoken word alone. Slow sales have the same effect as closed doors. When you look at your offering and see that the world has not yet responded with the enthusiasm you expected, the temptation is enormous to read that silence as permanent rejection. The signal changes. What was once a clear transmission of confident supply becomes something quieter and more uncertain. Something that asks rather than commands. Something that apologizes rather than stands firm. You are still sending a signal, but it is now asking for permission instead of receiving with expectation. And the formless substance does not respond to apology. It responds to conviction. This is why two people can use identical words, speak identical affirmations, follow identical morning rituals, and produce entirely different results. The words are the surface. The signal is the substance beneath the words. One person speaks abundance and simultaneously feels abundance in every cell of their body, in every assumption of their day, in every step they take. The other person speaks abundance and simultaneously feels the quiet terror of what happens if abundance does not come. The signal is different. The impression on the formless substance is different. And because the impression is different, the results are different. Even when the vocabulary is identical, an unstable signal creates unstable action. When you do not know from one day to the next whether you believe supply is coming, your actions reflect that uncertainty. You make offers timidly, You undercharge because you are afraid of rejection. You delay publishing, speaking, sending, or committing because the signal keeps changing, and you do not want to act boldly on a signal you are not sure you can sustain. The instability of the inner command produces the hesitation and inconsistency of the outer movement. Wealth cannot follow a path that keeps shifting. It requires a channel, and a channel requires a stable inner direction. Stable wealth requires a stable inner command, not a command you repeat when you feel good and abandon when you feel afraid. A command you hold with the same firmness, whether the morning brings good news or silence. Wattles was precise about this. The dominant thought is the creative thought. Dominance means consistency. It means the signal you send when no one is watching and the bills have arrived and the inbox is empty is the same signal you send when everything is going well. That is not easy, but it is the exact skill that separates those who occasionally glimpse prosperity from those who live in its steady stream. If you have recognized yourself in what you have just heard, if you have felt the truth of a divided signal operating inside you, if you are tired of affirming abundance in the morning and living in financial anxiety by afternoon, then this moment is a decision point. Not a small decision, a signal decision. The comment you leave below is not a social action. It is a declaration. It is a public alignment with the law you are learning. If you are ready to stop sending two messages to the source, to end the contradiction between your spoken desire and your emotional broadcast, then comment right now. My signal is certain. Let those words be more than a comment. Let them be the beginning of a new dominant impression. When you write those words and send them into a visible space, you are practicing the very law we are teaching. You are making your inner decision external. You are embodying the signal before the evidence has arrived. That is exactly what Wattles described as the certain way. Not certainty after proof, certainty before proof. Not trust when circumstances cooperate, trust when the inbox is silent and the account is low and the outer world has not yet moved. My signal is certain. Write that now and mean it. The divided signal does not only delay wealth, it exhausts the person carrying it. There is a cost to living between faith and fear every day, and that cost is felt in the body, in the mind, and in the spirit. The emotional whiplash of hoping in the morning and dreading by evening is not a minor inconvenience. It is a consuming inner conflict that takes energy that should be moving toward creative action and redirects it entirely toward the management of anxiety. You are not resting. You are not building. You are spending enormous amounts of your inner resources simply trying to keep yourself from collapsing under the weight of uncertainty. Hope followed by dread. This is the rhythm of the divided signal. You hear something encouraging and your signal rises. You look at an unchanged bank balance and it falls. You receive a kind word about your work, and for a moment you feel the alignment returning. Then a week passes with no new income, and the feeling of alignment evaporates. You have been living inside this cycle for so long that it feels like reality. It feels like the natural rhythm of life. But it is not. It is the rhythm of a signal that has never been stabilized. And it is costing you far more than money. Faith followed by checking. This is another version of the same cost. You pray. You release. You tell yourself you trust. And then 20 minutes later, you find yourself checking the account, checking your messages, checking for evidence that the prayer is being answered. Each check is an act of doubt. Each check says to the formless substance that you do not believe the order has been received, and so you need to verify. Wattles would call this interfering with the process. Every time you check for proof that the signal is working, you are momentarily withdrawing the signal and replacing it with a question. The process cannot complete itself if it is constantly being questioned. Desire followed by guilt. Many in this audience feel ashamed they have never spoken aloud. They want more money, and then they feel wrong for wanting it. They want a better life, and then they tell themselves it is selfish. They hold a vision of financial freedom, and then a voice arrives to remind them that wanting things is a spiritual weakness. This guilt is one of the most destructive forms of signal interference. When you desire wealth and simultaneously judge yourself for desiring it, you are cutting the signal at its root. You cannot receive what you have decided you should not want. The divided signal in this case is not just fear of lack. It is moral opposition to the very thing you are asking for. Action followed by retreat. You take the courageous step. You send the message. You make the offer. You begin the thing. And then nothing immediate happens, and the fear returns, and the action is not followed by another action. It is followed by retreat. You pull back. You go quiet. You wait and wonder whether you should have tried at all. The signal that was briefly clear and forward-moving has been interrupted by the very silence that the signal needed to persist through. Wattles was insistent that action must follow the command and that the action must continue, not because the result has yet appeared, but because the inner command has been given and the alignment must be maintained through movement. Gratitude followed by complaint. You begin the day giving thanks. You count what you have. You feel the warmth of acknowledgement for the good that already exists. And then someone else's success provokes comparison, or a new bill arrives, or a plan that seemed promising falls through, and the gratitude is replaced entirely by the voice that counts all that is missing. You have switched frequencies. The gratitude was real, but it was not the dominant signal. It was a brief morning practice surrounded on all sides by a much louder habit of registering everything that is not yet supplied. The complaint undoes what the gratitude began. Vision followed by the words, "This will never happen." This is perhaps the most common form of emotional cost. You hold the vision. You see it clearly. You feel it briefly. You allow yourself one moment of genuine belief that the life you are describing is real and coming. And then the mind arrives with its analysis. The bank account is examined. The timeline is estimated. The obstacles are listed. The historical failure rate of your attempts is calculated. And before the vision has had time to deepen its impression on the formless substance, the mind has dismantled it with its insistence on visible evidence and logical limitation. The vision dies before it has been held long enough to become instruction. You exhaust yourself with this cycle, not once a year, not occasionally, every day. The mental and emotional energy required to maintain a divided signal, to want and fear simultaneously, to hope and dread simultaneously, to act and retreat simultaneously, is enormous. And it leaves very little capacity for the calm, steady, creative work that building a wealthy life actually requires. Wattles spoke of the certain way not as a shortcut, but as a path of least resistance. When the signal is unified, the same energy that is currently being consumed by inner conflict becomes available for inspired action. That is a transformation not just of wealth, but of life. You have been thinking that source is slow. You have wondered why your prayers have not been answered on the timeline you needed. You have sat in the silence of an unanswered desire and told yourself that either you are doing something wrong or the law does not work for someone like you. But consider another possibility, one that Wattles placed at the center of his teaching. What if the source has been responding all along, and the delay has not been on the side of the supply, but on the side of the signal? What if the message that reaches the formless substance has not been clear enough or consistent enough or unified enough to allow the wealth that is already available to find its way to you? That is not a condemnation. That is a diagnosis. And a diagnosis can be corrected. Your own signal keeps changing. This is the heart of the emotional cost section, and it must be said plainly because Wattles said it plainly. The law does not change. The formless substance does not change. The availability of supply does not change. What changes constantly and at the mercy of every piece of visible evidence is your own broadcast. You are not being withheld from. You are not being punished. You are not unlucky. You are transmitting a signal that keeps switching, and a signal that keeps switching cannot be delivered to. The remainder of this teaching will show you how to find, hold, and protect the single steady signal that allows wealth to move toward you with the full force of the law behind it. Wattles was not teaching a technique. He was revealing a law. The distinction matters because a technique can be done incorrectly or done occasionally without a true change in one's state. A law operates whether or not you acknowledge it, whether or not you are conscious of it, and with equal force on both sides. If the law says that dominant thought impresses the formless substance and brings forth corresponding conditions, then it operates when your dominant thought is wealth and when your dominant thought is fear. It does not favor you because you are sincere. It responds to whatever is most consistently and most powerfully impressed upon it. This is both the severity and the mercy of the law. You can change what you impress, but you cannot ignore the impression you are currently sending. A passing thought has little power. Wattles was careful to distinguish between the thought that visits and the thought that dwells. You may have a wealthy thought many times throughout the day, a flash of vision, a moment of inspiration, a brief feeling of abundance. These are real and they are valuable, but they do not alone constitute the dominant signal. The formless substance is not responding to your best moments, it is responding to your average state. The thought that you return to most reliably, most often, most automatically. The thought your mind moves toward when it is not being deliberately directed is the thought that is actually doing the creative work. And for most people struggling with money, that automatic thought is not one of supply. It is one of shortage. Repeated thought gathers force. This is one of the most practically important principles in Wattles' teaching and one of the least applied. Every time a thought is repeated, it deepens its groove in the mind. Every time a fear-based thought is spoken, rehearsed or allowed to run uninterrupted, it strengthens its position as the dominant signal. Every time a wealth-based thought is returned to with intention and feeling, it accumulates creative force. The repetition of a thought is not redundancy, it is construction. You are building the dominant impression one return, one repetition, one choice of focus at a time. The question is not whether you are building, you are always building. The question is what you are building with the thoughts you choose to repeat. Emotional thought carries weight. A thought without feeling is a thought without much creative force. Wattles understood that the feeling attached to a thought is what drives it deep into the formless substance. A wealthy thought held with genuine feeling, with the warm certainty of a person who already knows supply is coming, carries far more creative power than the same thought repeated mechanically without any emotional engagement. This is why you can repeat an affirmation 100 times and feel no change. The words were spoken, but the feeling was absent. Or worse, the words were spoken while the feeling was contradicting them, and the feeling was stronger than the words. Feeling is the carrier frequency of the thought. Without it, the thought has little reach. Believed thought becomes instruction. This is the pivotal distinction. A thought you merely repeat is a thought you actually believe, a thought you have accepted at the level of identity and expectation, becomes an instruction to the formless substance. When you believe something, your entire inner system aligns around it. Your perception begins to look for confirmation of it. Your actions begin to move in harmony with it. Your speech begins to reflect it without effort. When you believe wealth is moving toward you, you do not have to remind yourself to act wealthy. The belief becomes the instruction that the whole of your being begins to execute. This is why belief is not optional in Wattles' system. It is the mechanism by which thought becomes form. Spoken thought reinforces identity. Every word you speak about money is a contribution to the identity you hold about yourself in relation to money. When you say, "I can never get ahead," you are not describing your circumstances. You are deepening an identity. When you say money always seems to slip away, you are not making an observation. You are strengthening a self-concept that the formless substance will continue to reflect back to you. Wattles taught that the words spoken in connection with wealth are not neutral. They are acts of creation or acts of destruction. They either reinforce the wealth signal or they reinforce the lack signal. There is no middle ground in the spoken word. Every sentence about money is a vote for the signal you are choosing. Acted thought becomes embodied. The signal is not complete until it moves the body. A thought held, a feeling generated, a belief accepted, a word spoken, and then nothing done, is a signal that stops short of full embodiment. Wattles was very clear that action is the fourth component of the certain way, and that action must be aligned with the inner command. Action taken from fear sends a fear signal, even if the words surrounding it are words of faith. Action taken from supply, the action of a person who already knows provision is coming and is simply cooperating with its arrival, sends a wealth signal that completes the instruction to the formless substance. It is not enough to think wealthy. You must eventually act from a state of supply, the formless substance responds to dominant impression. Not to the most desperate impression, not to the impression sent in the greatest emotional distress, not to the impression sent with the most need, to the dominant impression, the one that has been held most consistently, most deeply, most fully. This is the summary of everything Wattles taught about how thought becomes wealth: dominance, consistency, depth. These are the qualities of a signal that the invisible supply can follow to its destination. Wealth requires a dominant wealth signal, not a perfect signal, not a signal that never wavers, but one that returns so reliably and with such accumulated force that it outweighs every competing fear signal and stands as the clear, unmistakable instruction that the formless substance moves to fulfill. There is a belief embedded deeply in the sincere spiritual seeker that must be disrupted before this teaching can fully take root, and it is this: that the desire for money is the same as alignment with money, that wanting is the same as transmitting, that because you feel the longing for abundance so strongly, that longing itself must be drawing abundance toward you. This belief is understandable, it is emotionally logical, but it is not how the law works. And the longer it goes unexamined, the longer it prevents the real signal from being sent. Wanting is not alignment. This is one of the hardest truths in Wattles' teaching because it disturbs the comfortable assumption that intense desire is enough. Wanting money with great emotional force does not automatically create the wealth signal. In fact, the feeling of wanting, when examined closely, often contains within it a deep awareness of not having. The longing itself can carry the vibration of absence. When you want something desperately, you are in many cases acutely aware of how far away it still is. That awareness of distance is not a wealth signal. It is a lack signal wearing the clothing of desire. You can want money while broadcasting fear of money. Think about this carefully. A person who desires wealth but also fears debt, fears failure, fears loss, fears being seen, fears not being worthy of receiving, is not sending a unified wealth signal. They are sending a complex signal that includes desire at the surface and fear at the foundation. And Wattles was clear that the foundation is what matters most in the creative process. What you build your desire upon, what emotional base sits beneath your aspiration, is what the formless substance primarily receives. The desire is real, but it is resting on a foundation of fear, and a desire resting on a foundation of fear produces a signal that is neither fully fear nor fully faith. It is precisely the divided signal we have been describing. You can desire wealth while living in emotional poverty. This is a state of profound spiritual contradiction, and it describes many sincere people who have been practicing prosperity principles for years without consistent results. The desire is genuine. The reading, the study, the affirmations, the visualizations, all genuine. But the emotional climate of daily life has not shifted. The body still braces for bad news. The stomach still tightens when the account is checked. The mind still runs the scenarios of worst cases. The emotional home address is still poverty, even though the spoken address is abundance. And the formless substance delivers to the address where you actually live, not the address you have written on the outside of the envelope. Wattles was not being cruel in making this distinction. He was being merciful. Because once you understand that wanting is not enough, you are freed from the frustration of doing everything right on the surface while remaining confused about why nothing has changed. The surface was not the level at which the law was operating. It was operating at the level of your dominant emotional reality, which had never been fully aligned with the wealth you were verbally requesting. This is not a condemnation of your sincerity. It is a clarification of the mechanism. And once the mechanism is clear, you can work with it rather than against it. You have been taught, often implicitly, that if you want wealth badly enough and pray faithfully enough and affirm consistently enough, the universe must respond. But the law does not respond to the quantity of your desire or the volume of your prayer. It responds to the quality of your signal. A small, consistent, genuinely felt wealth signal will outperform a large, desperate, emotionally divided one every time. Because the law is about dominance, and dominance is about consistency, not intensity. The viewer who calmly returns to a wealth signal every day, correcting the fear when it arises, and recentering on supply, is sending a far clearer instruction than the one who oscillates between fevered affirmation and collapse into doubt. The disruption is this: stop waiting to feel wealthy enough to transmit the wealth signal. Stop waiting until the evidence confirms that you can safely believe. The signal must precede the evidence. The instruction must be given before the delivery arrives. Wattles placed this at the center of his entire system. You do not get wealthy and then begin thinking wealthy. You begin thinking wealthy, clearly and dominantly and consistently. And wealth follows the signal you have sent into the formless substance. This sequence cannot be reversed. And every time you wait for the evidence before committing to the signal, you delay the very evidence you are waiting for. The belief that must be disrupted is not a small one. It runs through every anxious financial prayer, every desperate affirmation, every moment of hoping while fearing. But it can be disrupted. And in the moment of disruption, when you truly understand that the signal must be unified rather than simply intensified, the path forward becomes clear in a way it may never have been before. You do not need more desire. You need a cleaner signal. That is the Master's law, and it is the law this entire teaching is built upon. Something is cancelling your wealth signal, not occasionally, regularly, and it is not a dramatic spiritual failure. It is a sentence, a very ordinary sentence that sounds reasonable, that feels protective, that arrives with the credibility of lived experience. It appears after you have made your declaration and held your vision and felt the signal beginning to solidify. And then something in the visible world fails to move or moves too slowly or disappears entirely, and the sentence arrives. And when it arrives, it undoes more than you realize. Later in this teaching, we will name that sentence precisely and show you exactly what it does to the signal. For now, understand that it exists, that you have spoken it many times, and that it has been working against you every single time. This sentence sounds realistic. That is precisely what makes it so dangerous. It does not announce itself as a fear signal. It does not feel like a poverty declaration. It feels like honesty. It feels like the reasonable acknowledgement of visible facts. It speaks in the language of discernment and maturity. It says, I am simply being practical. It says, I am just facing reality. And because it sounds like wisdom, it bypasses every spiritual defense you have built. You would not consciously choose to cancel your wealth order, but because this sentence wears the clothing of good sense, you allow it through. And the order is cancelled. It feels protective. The sentence arrives in moments of vulnerability, when the evidence has been disappointing and the fear is rising, and it offers a kind of shelter. If you lower your expectation now, it says quietly, you will not be devastated later. If you acknowledge that this may not work, you will be spared the pain of a hope that does not materialize. This is the protective function of the cancelling signal. It presents itself as emotional self-care. It presents itself as the wise management of expectations. But Wattles would call it something else entirely. He would call it the signal of fear wearing the mask of wisdom. And fear in any form, even dressed as wisdom, corrupts the signal. It often appears after silence. When you have sent the signal and waited and no visible result has appeared in the time your mind expected, the cancelling sentence is most likely to arrive. The silence becomes the evidence of failure, and the sentence arrives to explain that failure in terms that feel true. Nothing is moving. Nothing has changed. The silence is confirmation that it was foolish to expect anything else. This is the moment when the greatest number of wealth signals in history have been withdrawn. Not because the source had failed to receive the order, but because the silence was misread as rejection, and the cancelling sentence was allowed to withdraw the order just before the delivery was scheduled to arrive. It begins with the word, but. You will recognize it now. You say, money is moving toward me. And before the statement can settle into your body as a belief, the sentence arrives, but nothing is happening. You say, the source provides through channels I cannot yet see. And immediately, but I have been waiting for months. You say, I am aligned with supply. And the answer is swift. But look at the account. The word but is the pivot point of the cancelling signal. Everything before the but is the wealth order. Everything after the but is the cancellation, and the mind tends to remember and act on the part that comes after. This one word, this one conjunction, carries within it the full weight of fear and doubt. It is small enough to seem harmless. It appears logical enough to pass without examination. But in the economy of spiritual signal, it does enormous damage. It splits the instruction. It says to the formless substance, "Here is my order, and here is also my belief that the order cannot be filled." And the formless substance, which responds to the dominant impression, cannot fulfill an order that is simultaneously placed and retracted. The but is not a question, it is not a refinement, it is a cancellation, and it is spoken dozens of times each day by people who believe they are practicing faith, while the but is dismantling it. It weakens the order each time it is spoken. Unlike the wealth signal, which grows stronger with repetition, the cancelling sentence does not become less powerful with use. It becomes more powerful. Each time you say, "I want this, but I cannot see how it will come," you deepen the neural pathway of that expectation. You make it more automatic. You increase its authority in the hierarchy of your beliefs. The wealth order becomes weaker. The cancellation becomes more familiar. And the dominant signal, the one that Wattles said is the actual creative instruction to the formless substance, becomes less about supply and more about the expectation of its absence. The viewer must learn to catch this sentence, not once, not occasionally, as a daily, moment-to-moment practice of signal maintenance. When the but appears, the work begins, not the work of argument or suppression, but the work of replacement, the work of returning firmly and without drama to the signal that has been chosen. We will give you that practice in full detail before this teaching closes. What you need to know now is that the cancelling signal exists, that you know it intimately, that it has been operating inside your financial life with remarkable consistency, and that the moment you begin to catch it and correct it, the dominant wealth signal begins to stabilize. That stabilization is the beginning of everything. The signal is not a metaphor. It is the actual mechanism through which the invisible supply becomes visible. Wattles described the formless substance as the original source of all that exists in material form. Wealth in its essence is not paper currency or account balances. It is a form that the formless has taken in response to the dominant impression held by the mind and felt by the body and expressed through the life of the one who is receiving. This is not mysticism for its own sake. It is a practical description of how the law operates. The formless moves toward form when the impression made upon it is clear, consistent, sustained, and believed. The signal is the impression, and the signal has 5 components, each of which must be understood and aligned. Thought gives direction. The first element of the signal is the thought, the mental image held in the mind with clarity and intention. Wattles was insistent that vagueness in thought produces vagueness in result. You cannot order from the formless substance in general terms and expect a specific delivery. If your thought is simply, "I want more money," without a clear image of what that means, what form it takes, what it feels like to have it, what you will do with it, then the signal lacks direction. Direction is the first gift that thought gives to the formless substance. It says, "This is where you are sending the supply. This is the destination." Without direction, supply cannot move toward a specific point. It remains diffuse and unharvested. Feeling gives atmosphere. The second element of the signal is feeling, the emotional climate in which the thought lives. A thought without feeling is like a letter without a stamp. It has been written, but it has not been sent. The feeling is what propels the thought into the creative field with enough force to make an impression. Wattles understood that the feeling attached to the wealth signal is not excitement or desperation. Those are not the feelings of a person who has already received. The feeling that stabilizes the signal is something calmer and deeper. It is the warm certainty of one who knows, the inner assurance of supply already in motion. When you can hold that feeling, even briefly, and return to it regularly, the signal begins to carry the atmosphere of receiving. Speech gives reinforcement. The third element is the spoken word, and it operates in 2 directions simultaneously. When you speak wealth, you deepen the impression in your own nervous system. You reinforce the identity you are building, and you also send the signal into the world in a form that can be heard and responded to. Speech is the bridge between the invisible signal and the visible world. When your speech consistently reflects supply, it trains every part of your body, your perception, your attitude, your presence, to operate from a state of supply. When your speech reflects lack, it trains every part of you to live from lack. The words you speak about money are not commentary. They are construction. Expectation gives permission. This is perhaps the most overlooked element of the signal. Expectation is the part of the signal that says to the formless substance, "This is not just a wish. This is an anticipated delivery." When you expect supply, you do not grip the outcome. You prepare for it. You leave space for it. You act in ways that make sense only if it is coming. Expectation is the permission slip that tells the formless substance the receiver is ready. A person who hopes without expecting is still fundamentally uncertain. A person who expects without reservation is signaling not just desire, but readiness. And readiness is one of the conditions the law of supply responds to most powerfully. Action gives embodiment. The signal is not complete without action. This is where Wattles diverged sharply from passive interpretations of prosperity teaching. The formless substance responds to the full signal, and the full signal includes movement. Action taken from the state of supply, from the assumption that wealth is already in motion and one is cooperating with its delivery, is qualitatively different from action taken from fear. Fear-based action creates a fear signal. Supply-based action creates a supply signal. The same physical movement can carry two entirely different inner instructions depending on the state from which it is taken. The viewer who sends a business email from a state of confident supply is sending a different signal than the one who sends it from panic. The action is identical. The signal is not. Fear corrupts the signal. Fear does not cancel the signal from outside. It corrupts it from within. When fear enters any one of the five elements, thought, feeling, speech, expectation, or action, it introduces contradiction into the instruction. A fearful thought divides the direction. A fearful feeling changes the atmosphere. A fearful spoken word undermines the reinforcement. A fearful expectation withdraws the permission. A fearful action embodies the wrong state. Fear is not merely unpleasant. In the economy of invisible supply, fear is a countermand. It is the instruction that says, "Do not deliver." And when it appears in the dominant signal, the supply cannot find its way to the receiver. Gratitude stabilizes the signal. Wattles understood that gratitude is not simply a spiritual practice for its own sake. It is a stabilizing agent in the wealth signal. When you are genuinely grateful for what has already been supplied, you are holding the emotional tone of a person who has received. That tone is the same tone that the wealth signal needs to remain steady. Gratitude says, "Supply has come before and will come again." It says, "I am not waiting for proof because I already have proof in what I have already been given." Gratitude roots the signal in an experience of supply rather than an expectation of lack, and that rootedness gives the signal its necessary stability. Certainty strengthens the signal. Certainty is the quality that the cancelling signal works hardest to destroy. When you are certain, the but has nothing to grab onto. Certainty is not arrogance. It is not the denial of circumstances. It is the knowledge of law. It is the same quality that allows you to be certain the sun will rise tomorrow, even though you cannot see it now. You do not need to see it to be certain. You know the law behind it. Certainty about the wealth signal operates the same way. You do not need to see the supply to be certain of it. You need to know the law and trust the law, and hold the signal with the steadiness of one who knows that the law does not fail. Repetition deepens the signal. Each time you return to the wealth signal, each time you choose the thought of supply over the thought of shortage, each time you correct the cancelling sentence and replace it with the wealth statement, you are deepening the groove of the dominant impression. Repetition is not redundancy. It is accumulation. The signal grows stronger every time it is returned to. The fear signal grows weaker every time it is corrected. Over days, over weeks, the balance shifts. The dominant impression is no longer divided. It becomes steady. And when it becomes steady, the invisible supply begins to move through channels that were always available but were not noticed because the signal was too unstable to perceive them. Contradiction weakens the signal. Every contradiction in the 5 elements reduces the clarity and power of the total impression. When thought says wealth and feeling says scarcity, the impression is weakened by exactly the degree of contradiction between them. When speech says supply and expectation says doubt, the signal is split. The formless substance cannot resolve the contradiction on your behalf. It responds to the dominant impression, and if the dominant impression is contradictory, it responds to a contradictory instruction, which produces contradictory results. Supply arrives and then disappears. Opportunity appears and then closes. Progress begins and then stalls. The contradictory signal produces the contradictory life. This is not punishment, it is law. The signal must become one. All 5 elements, thought, feeling, speech, expectation, and action, must be pointed in the same direction. Not perfectly, because the human mind is not a machine and the emotions are not switches, but dominantly. The dominant thought must be wealthy. The dominant feeling must be supplied. The dominant speech must reflect abundance. The dominant expectation must be open to delivery. The dominant action must be that of a person who knows wealth is moving toward them. When these 5 elements begin to move as one, the signal that reaches the formless substance is no longer a question. It is a command. And the formless substance responds to clear commands with the full force of infinite supply behind them. Money moves toward congruent receivers. This is the law in its simplest form. Congruent means aligned, internally consistent, sending one signal through all 5 channels. When the receiver is congruent, the supply finds its way. Not always through the channel expected, not always on the timeline anticipated, but with the certainty of a law that does not play favorites and does not fail. The supply moves toward the signal. The signal must be one. This is what Wattles taught. This is what every master before and after him has confirmed in their own language and from their own tradition. And this is the teaching that you are now being equipped to live. There is a difference between a command and a plan, and understanding that difference may be one of the most liberating things this teaching offers you. A command, in Wattles' language, is the clear inner signal sent to the formless substance. It is the decision of the mind and heart about what is to be received, held with the certainty of a person who knows that the invisible supply is responsive to a clear impression. A plan is something different. A plan is the human mind's attempt to map out the route through which the supply will arrive. And the plan, when it is placed above the command, does not serve the wealth signal. It competes with it. A command says, "Wealth is moving toward me." It does not add conditions. It does not specify the route. It does not require that the bank account improve by a certain date or that a specific client appear through a specific channel. It simply states, with all the clarity and certainty the inner life can generate, that supply is in motion and the receiver is ready. This is the command, this is the signal in its most powerful form. When you can hold this command without immediately turning it into a planning session, you have placed yourself in alignment with the law, exactly as Wattles described it. A panic plan says, "Nothing is coming unless I force it." The panic plan is the mind working from fear rather than from command. It calculates what must be done to make the supply appear. It lists the steps. It constructs timelines. It identifies the visible channels through which money must come. And in doing so, it places the entire weight of provision on the visible world strategy, effectively removing the invisible supply from the equation. The panic plan does not cooperate with the law. It attempts to replace the law with human calculation. And human calculation operating from a state of fear is far too limited to find the channels that the source has already prepared. A command is repeated calmly. This is another distinction that matters enormously in practice. The command is not shouted. It is not repeated with increasing urgency as the evidence fails to arrive. Urgency is a signal of doubt. It says, "The delivery is late and I am afraid it will not come." The command is repeated calmly because the one who commands from a position of trust does not need urgency. They know the order has been received. They know the law does not fail. They return to the command each day, each morning, each moment when the fear arises, not with desperation but with the quiet firmness of one who understands that repetition deepens the impression and that the impression is what moves the supply. A clear command creates perception. This is where the practical and the spiritual intersect in a way that is impossible to dismiss. When your dominant signal is one of supply, your perception changes. You begin to notice things you did not notice before. A message that might previously have seemed unimportant now registers as a potential channel. A conversation that might have passed without comment suddenly contains an opening. An idea that would previously have been dismissed as too small or too uncertain now feels worth pursuing. The command does not change the channels. The channels were always there. The command changes your perception of them. And perception is the gateway through which wealth enters the visible world. Perception notices channels. The channels of invisible supply are not created by the signal. They are noticed by the receiver, whose signal is clear and expectant. This is why two people can walk through the same day, encounter the same opportunities, speak to the same people, and come away with entirely different results. One is broadcasting certainty and openness. The other is broadcasting fear and contraction. The one broadcasting certainty notices the channel in the conversation. The one broadcasting fear sees only the obstacle. The channels were equally present. The perception was entirely different. The signal determined the perception, and the perception determined the result. Action follows perception. Once the channel is perceived, it must be entered. This is where the command meets the physical world in a way that completes the signal. You perceive the opportunity. You take the action. You send the message, make the call, extend the offer, accept the invitation. This action is not frantic. It is not desperate. It is the calm, sure movement of a person who has identified the channel that the source has opened and is walking through it with the confidence of one who expected exactly this kind of opening to appear. The action is not the hope that something might work. It is the embodiment of the knowledge that the command has been heard and supply is arriving through this specific door. Money moves through noticed channels. This is the complete sequence. The command is given, the signal is held, the perception is opened, the channel is noticed, the action is taken, and money moves through the channel that was always there waiting to be recognized. The delay in most financial lives is not the delay of the supply. It is the delay of the perception. The channels close not because the source withdraws them, but because the fear signal closes the eyes of the receiver to the openings that are present. When the signal becomes clear, the eyes open. The channels that were invisible in the climate of fear become plainly visible in the atmosphere of certainty. And the action that follows is not desperation. It is cooperation with a delivery already in motion. The viewer must therefore command before evidence. This is the supreme demand of the law and the supreme test of faith. You must give the command, hold the signal, and act from supply before a single piece of visible evidence has confirmed that the supply is coming. You must send the signal into the formless substance, not because the bank account has improved, but because the law says it will improve in response to the signal. This requires a reversal of the habit that most people have spent a lifetime developing. The habit of requiring proof before belief. The law asks for the reversal: belief before proof, signal before delivery, command before evidence. And when the mind can sustain that reversal long enough for the dominant impression to stabilize, the evidence begins to arrive with a regularity that no longer surprises, because you have learned to expect it. Therefore, signal affects opportunity recognition. The wealth signal is not passive. It is not simply a feeling you maintain while waiting for the universe to deliver. It is an active perceptual filter that opens the mind to channels and opportunities that a fear signal would make invisible. When you clean up the signal, you do not just feel better. You see more, you notice more, you act more precisely, because you are acting from a perception that is no longer contracted by fear into a narrow tunnel of visible limitation. The formless substance is always providing. The channels are always open. The signal determines whether the receiver can see them. And only a clear, steady, unified signal can open that perception fully enough for the wealth to find its way home. If this teaching is reaching something real in you, if you are beginning to see the mechanism behind the financial patterns you have lived with for so long, then you have found the right place. The Master's legacy exists to preserve and interpret the teachings of the great spiritual authorities: Wallace Wattles, James Allen, Florence Scovel Shinn, and others who understood the invisible laws that govern the visible world. These teachings are not quick tricks. They are not surface motivation. They are deep laws of mind and source and supply that have the power to transform the entire inner architecture from which your financial life is built. Subscribe to the Master's Legacy. These teachings are for people who are ready to master the invisible causes behind their visible results. Every week, this channel goes deeper. Each teaching is designed to build upon the last, to reveal one more layer of the law, one more hidden error, one more correction that can move the wealth signal closer to its full power. The viewer who watches once and moves on will receive a fragment of what is available. The viewer who subscribes and returns and builds their understanding across many teachings will receive something else entirely. They will receive the cumulative effect of these laws working together in their life with increasing clarity and force. Subscribe now, and let the Master's Legacy continue to serve as your interpreter of the ancient wealth laws that are as alive and operative today as they were the day they were first revealed. The mind wants proof before it will send the signal. It says, "Show me that wealth is actually coming and I will believe it. Show me the client, the contract, the deposit, the confirmation, and then I will send the signal of supply." This seems rational. It seems responsible. It seems like the kind of thinking that prevents foolishness. But it is the exact reversal of the law. The law says the signal precedes the delivery. The mind's demand for proof before signal is not wisdom. It is the fear signal disguised as caution. And as long as the mind holds this position, the signal it sends is not one of certainty. It is one of conditional belief. And conditional belief is not the same as command. The mind says, "Show me money, and then I will feel supplied." The law says, "Feel supplied and act supplied," and you become capable of receiving. These two sequences produce entirely different results. In the mind's version, the wealth must appear from outside before the internal state changes, which means the internal state is always at the mercy of external evidence. In the law's version, the internal state is established first, which allows the perceptual and practical conditions for wealth to assemble themselves in alignment with the signal. One sequence keeps the receiver dependent on visible proof. The other sequence makes the receiver the source of the signal that draws the proof into being. The mind cannot calculate the how, because the how involves channels. The mind cannot see from its current position of contracted fear. The mind calculates from what it already knows, from the visible channels it has already tried, from the historical evidence it has already accumulated. But the source operates through invisible channels, through connections not yet made, through ideas not yet conceived, through opportunities not yet visible from the perspective of where you stand today. If you could calculate the how, you would not need the law. The law exists precisely because the how is beyond the mind's calculation. The signal opens you to the channels the mind could never have planned. This is why Wattles taught that your role is not to figure out how wealth will come. Your role is to hold the what clearly and with certainty. The what is the vision, the clear mental image of the wealth you are ordering from the formless substance. The how is the business of the source, which has access to every channel, every connection, every possibility that the limited mind cannot see. When you stop trying to calculate the how and start trusting the what to the source, you stop interfering with the delivery mechanism. You stop redirecting the supply toward visible channels that the mind can understand and trust, and you open yourself to the full range of invisible channels through which abundance knows how to arrive. The demand for proof before belief creates a waiting loop from which there is no exit from within the mind. You wait for proof. Proof requires delivery. Delivery requires the signal. The signal requires belief. Belief requires proof. The loop is closed. Nothing moves. The viewer who has spent years practicing affirmations without consistent results is often caught inside this loop. The solution is not more affirmations. It is the genuine disruption of the demand for proof. It is the decision, made not from naivety, but from knowledge of the law, to send the signal before the evidence is available. That decision breaks the loop. The signal goes out. The delivery begins its movement. The proof eventually arrives, not first but last, as it must, because the law is unchanging. The mind's inability to calculate the how is not a weakness. It is a design. You were not designed to manage the invisible supply. You were designed to command it through your inner signal and then cooperate with it through aligned action. The source manages the how. You manage the signal. When each party attends to its proper role, the system works with a precision and a generosity that the calculating mind could never have produced on its own. Wattles saw this clearly. Release the how, command the what, maintain the signal, walk through the nearest open door, and trust that the source, which sees everything your mind cannot, is already preparing the channels through which your supply will arrive. Imagine a radio transmitter of the kind that has existed for more than a century. It is designed to send a signal on a specific frequency to a receiver somewhere in the world that is tuned to receive exactly that frequency. When the transmitter holds its frequency steadily, the message is clear. The receiver picks it up without interference. The communication is complete. Now imagine that the transmitter keeps changing its frequency. Every few minutes it shifts. It broadcasts on one frequency for a moment, then switches to another, then returns, then shifts again. The receiver at the other end hears nothing coherent. Not because the transmission was not powerful, not because the technology was not present, but because no single frequency was held long enough to constitute a complete message. The receiver cannot deliver a clear signal it never fully received. This is precisely the situation many sincere people find themselves in when it comes to the wealth signal. The transmitter, which is their inner state composed of thought, feeling, speech, expectation, and action, is capable of extraordinary power. The receiver, which is the formless substance, the invisible supply, the source, is always tuned and always ready. But the frequency keeps changing. The signal keeps switching. And the delivery system cannot complete a delivery on the basis of a frequency that will not hold. This is not a failure of the source. This is not evidence that the law does not work. It is the mechanical consequence of a transmitter that cannot choose one signal and hold it. The viewer sends the signal, "I receive." They mean it. In that moment, the feeling is genuine. The thought is clear. The speech reflects it. And then something happens. A day passes with no visible result. The inbox is silent. The bank account has not changed. The hope that felt so solid begins to loosen, and the transmitter begins to drift. It starts to send another signal. Nothing works. This is not a dramatic shift. It does not feel like a betrayal of the original signal. It feels like honesty. But in the frequency terms of the invisible supply, it is an entirely different broadcast, one that carries the full emotional weight of disappointment and confirms to the receiver that the previous order has been withdrawn. Then the viewer recovers. They read something encouraging. They speak to someone who reminds them of the law. Their spirit lifts, and the transmitter shifts again. I trust, back to the original frequency, or something close to it. For a moment the signal is clear again, and then a piece of evidence arrives, a bill, a silence, a rejection, and the transmitter drifts again. I am doomed. This is not a story of weakness. It is the story of a transmitter that has never been trained to hold its frequency through conditions that challenge it, and the result in every case is a delivery system that cannot complete its work because it is always waiting for a signal that will stay. The field receives contradiction. When the formless substance receives a message composed of both supply and lack, of both trust and dread, of both receiving and closing, it cannot sort the contradiction into a clean delivery. The supply begins to move toward the signal of receiving. Then the signal shifts to lack and the supply cannot find its destination. Then the signal shifts back. The delivery is in perpetual motion without arriving. This is not cruelty. This is law. The law is precise, and the law is impersonal. It delivers to the signal it receives. When the signal is contradictory, the delivery is contradictory. When the signal is clear, the delivery is clear. The channel becomes unclear when the signal is unstable. Channels are the specific pathways through which invisible supply moves into the visible world. A channel might be a person, an idea, a conversation, a platform, a contract, a refund, a connection, an unexpected reversal of a previously closed door. These channels do not appear randomly. They appear in alignment with the dominant signal of the receiver. When the signal is stable and clear, the channels appear in proportion to that clarity. When the signal is unstable, the channels may partially open and then close again, because the receiver's frequency shifted before the delivery could be completed. Stable frequency creates stable reception. A transmitter that holds its frequency through silence, through delay, through the absence of visible evidence, is a transmitter that will eventually produce a coherent delivery. The stability is the key, not the volume of the transmission, not the emotional intensity. The stability, the willingness to return to the same signal day after day, morning after morning, moment after moment, when fear arrives and the but appears, and the visible world presents its case for doubt. The transmitter that holds through all of that is the one that the receiver can finally lock onto. And when the receiver locks on, the delivery begins with a reliability that the viewer may never have experienced before. The wealth signal must be held during silence. This is the supreme test of the signal, and it is the test that most people fail, not because they are weak, but because they have not understood the mechanism. The silence between the sending of the signal and the visible arrival of the supply is not evidence of failure. It is the interval during which the invisible channels are being prepared and the delivery is being assembled. The silence asks only one thing of the transmitter: hold the frequency. Do not interpret the silence as rejection. Do not read the absence of visible movement as proof that nothing is moving. The silence is not empty. It is full of invisible activity that cannot yet be seen. The signal must be held through the silence, and the signal held through silence is the strongest signal of all. The signal is tested when evidence is absent. This is not a coincidence. The absence of visible evidence is precisely the condition under which the signal reveals whether it is truly dominant or merely conditional. A signal that holds when evidence is present is not yet a true wealth signal. It is a reaction to favorable circumstances. The signal that holds when no evidence is present, when the account is low and the inbox is silent and the visible world offers nothing encouraging, that signal has passed the test of dominance. That signal has proven itself to be more than a response to conditions. It has proven itself to be an inner command that does not depend on conditions for its authority. The strongest signal is certainty without proof. This is the culmination of the radio transmitter analogy, and it is worth dwelling on. Certainty without proof is not denial. It is not delusion. It is the knowledge of law applied to your own specific financial situation. You know the law. You have studied it. You understand that the formless substance responds to the dominant signal. You know that your signal determines your perception. Your perception opens the channels, and the channels deliver the supply. Knowing all of this, you choose certainty. Not because the evidence has arrived, but because the law that precedes the evidence has been understood and trusted. This is the frequency the supply can always find. This is the signal that delivers. Interference is any signal element that contradicts the dominant wealth frequency. It does not have to be dramatic. It does not have to be a complete breakdown of faith. A small interference repeated consistently can be enough to prevent the delivery from completing. This is why the discipline of the signal is not about perfect faith from morning to night. It is about catching the interference as it arises and correcting it before it becomes dominant. The interferences are specific, recognizable, and correctable, and naming them gives you the power to stop them. Complaining after affirming is perhaps the most common form of interference. The morning affirmation sends the wealth signal with some force. Then during the day, a conversation arises, and the complaint begins. The money is not coming fast enough. The process is too slow. Nothing ever seems to work out. Each complaint is a transmission on the lack frequency. And if the complaint occupies more of the day than the affirmation, the complaint is the dominant signal. The affirmation was the exception. The complaint was the rule. And the formless substance responds to the rule, not the exception. Panicking after praying has the same interference effect. You lift the signal high in prayer. You feel the connection. You speak the wealth order with genuine feeling, and then you leave the prayer and re-enter the anxiety. The panic is not a small thing. It carries a very clear emotional charge, one of danger, urgency, and the expectation of shortage. That charge enters the signal with tremendous force precisely because it is emotionally powerful. One moment of panic can undo a much longer period of prayer if the panic is felt more deeply than the prayer. Depth of feeling, not duration, determines the power of the impression. Resenting wealthy people is a form of interference that is rarely examined in this connection, but Wattles would have identified it immediately as a corruption of the signal. When you resent someone who has what you desire, you are sending a signal that says wealth in the hands of others is wrong. And because the formless substance cannot distinguish between your analysis of someone else's wealth and your expectation of your own, it receives the general signal that wealth is to be resented. That signal does not attract supply. It creates aversion to the very thing you are asking for. Resentment of the wealthy is not a moral position. In the economy of the signal, it is self-sabotage. Saying money is evil or attaching moral condemnation to wealth in any form sends interference of an even deeper kind. When you have been taught, in any context, that money is the root of corruption, that desiring wealth is spiritually suspect, that rich people are morally compromised, those beliefs do not stay at the level of opinion. They enter the signal. They attach a condition to your wealth order that reads, "I want supply, but I also believe supply corrupts." The formless substance receives a command to bring you something you have simultaneously condemned. The interference is total. The delivery cannot be completed because the receiver has not made peace with receiving. Feeling guilty for wanting more is the personal version of the same interference. You want abundance, and then the guilt arrives. Who are you to want more when others have less? Is it not selfish? Should you not be content with what you have? This guilt does not protect your character. It interferes with your signal. It says to the formless substance, "I order abundance and simultaneously judge myself for ordering it." The order is contaminated. The delivery is blocked. Contentment and abundance are not enemies. They can coexist. But the guilt that says wanting more is wrong will block the supply as efficiently as any other form of fear. Calling desire unrealistic is a very specific form of interference that arrives wearing the clothing of self-awareness. You look at what you have ordered from the formless substance and you say, "That is probably too much. That is not realistic for someone like me. Who am I to expect that level of supply?" And in that moment of apparent humility, you have corrupted the signal. You have taken the clear command and introduced a contradiction. This is what I want, but it is probably beyond what I am entitled to receive. The formless substance cannot fill an order that the orderer has already decided is too large. The signal of humility, when it becomes a signal of smallness, is interference. Expecting disappointment is the most pervasive and most invisible form of interference because it operates below the level of conscious thought. You have been disappointed enough times that the expectation of disappointment has become automatic. You do not decide to expect disappointment, you simply do. And the signal you send is not primarily about the wealth you desire. It is primarily about the disappointment you have learned to anticipate. That expectation is a powerful signal. It is clear, it is emotional, it is believed, and it is pointed directly at the arrival of lack. Correcting this requires catching the expectation before it becomes the dominant feeling, and replacing it, not with forced optimism, but with the calm knowledge of the law. Refusing small channels is the last interference on this list, and it is the one that perhaps most clearly illustrates the mechanical nature of the delivery system. The source does not always deliver through grand and obvious channels. Often, and Wattles pointed toward this, it delivers through something small, something unexpected, something that requires the receiver to act before the full scope of the supply is visible. When you refuse the small channel because it does not match your image of what delivery should look like, you have closed the door through which the supply was attempting to arrive. The next channel may open, but you will have delayed the process by refusing the one that was already present. There is a kind of freedom that becomes available when you stop watching for the arrival of what you have ordered, not the freedom of indifference, which is not faith but resignation. The freedom of trust, which is the inner spaciousness of a person who has given the command to the formless substance and genuinely released the route by which it will be fulfilled. This freedom is the practical gift of a steady signal. When the signal is unified and you have done the inner work of aligning thought, feeling, speech, expectation, and action, there is nothing left to do in the invisible realm. The order has been placed. The law is operating, the tracking is unnecessary. Think of the difference between ordering something and obsessively refreshing the tracking information every 20 minutes. Both people have placed the order, but only one of them is living in the relaxed expectation of a delivery that is coming. The other is in a constant state of checking, verifying, wondering whether the delivery was actually sent, questioning whether the order was received correctly, bracing for the possibility that something went wrong. Which of these two signals communicates certainty? The one who checks compulsively is sending a signal of doubt dressed in the clothing of diligence. The one who ordered and released is sending the signal of trust that the law responds to most naturally. A steady signal does not ask the bank account for permission. This is one of the most liberating reorientations this teaching offers. The bank account is a record of past supply. It is not a measure of future supply. When you allow the current account balance to define what you believe is possible for the signal you are sending right now, you have given the past authority over the future. Wattles would not permit this. The signal is not determined by what the account currently shows. The signal determines what the account will eventually show. The direction of causation flows from signal to result, never from result to signal. When you understand this, the account loses its authority over your inner state. Certainty is not proven by comfort. Certainty is proven by silence. This is one of the Master's most demanding teachings, and it is also one of the most freeing. When everything is going well, when money is flowing and the channels are open and the evidence is favorable, certainty is easy. It costs nothing. But that is not the certainty the law is asking for. The law asks for the certainty that holds in the silence, when the evidence is neutral or negative, when the channels appear closed, when the visible world offers nothing to stand on. That is the certainty that proves the signal is dominant. And it is also, paradoxically, the certainty that most quickly breaks the silence and opens the next channel. The freedom of not tracking is also the freedom from the emotional exhaustion of compulsive evidence-seeking. Every time you check the account to see if the law has delivered, you are spending emotional and mental energy that could otherwise be invested in deepening the signal. The checking is not faith. The checking is the interruption of faith. A person of genuine certainty does not need to check. They know, not because they are in denial of the physical reality, but because they have placed their trust in a law that is more reliable than any physical evidence. The checking impulse, when caught and corrected, becomes one more moment of returning to the signal, and each return deepens the dominant impression. There is also a social freedom in this release. When you stop tracking the package, you stop needing to explain to others why the supply has not yet arrived. You stop defending your faith to those who are measuring it by visible results. You stop performing certainty while feeling doubt, which is its own exhausting contradiction. Instead, you live inside the signal quietly and firmly, not broadcasting it to the skeptical, not requiring others to validate it, simply holding it in the place where the creative work actually happens. This inner quietness is not weakness. It is the characteristic silence of one who knows the law and has given the command and is waiting with the patient certainty of a receiver who has no doubt the delivery is on its way. Freedom from tracking means freedom from urgency. Urgency says the delivery should have come by now. Trust says the delivery is coming in perfect time. Urgency changes the signal, as we have established, and urgency is always the enemy of the steady frequency. When you release the tracking, you release the urgency. You return to the calm authority of one who has commanded and released. The command was given. The law is operating. The channels are preparing. The supply is in motion. There is nothing to track. There is only the signal to hold, the nearest door to walk through, and the patient certainty that the formless substance, operating by a law that does not fail, is delivering exactly what has been clearly and consistently ordered. When you stop tracking, you start noticing. This is the final gift of the freedom from constant evidence-seeking. The mental space that was previously occupied by compulsive checking, by the anxious monitoring of all the places where the supply might appear, is suddenly available for perception. And perception, as we established in the section on the invisible mechanism, is the gateway through which wealth enters the visible world. The viewer who is no longer hunched over the tracking screen, refreshing every few minutes, is the viewer who looks up and sees the message they had not noticed, the invitation they had overlooked, the door that has been quietly open while they were focused on the one that remained closed. The first step in unifying your signal is defining precisely what you are ordering, not in vague terms, not in the language of general desire. In the specific, emotionally engaged, source-connected language of someone who knows that what they write and hold and speak will become the dominant impression sent to the formless substance. Wattles was emphatic on the necessity of clarity. The vision must be clear. The image must be definite. The what must be decided before the signal can be sent with the coherence that the invisible supply requires to move toward a specific destination. Write these words now, or speak them clearly to yourself, and feel every word as you say it. My wealth signal is money moves toward me through channels source opens. This is not a generic affirmation. It is a signal with 3 elements encoded within it. It states the direction of movement, supply moving toward the receiver. It acknowledges the receiver's role, staying open and ready. And it correctly assigns the route to the source, which sees all channels and does not depend on the visible world's current cooperation to find a way. This sentence is a complete instruction to the formless substance, and it is the foundation of the what that your signal must carry. Within the what, include your financial desire, in as much specificity as feels true and grounded. Not a number plucked from fantasy, but the number that represents the life of supply you are genuinely seeking to build, the specific amount of monthly flow that would represent freedom rather than fear, the specific level of provision that would allow you to give, to build, to serve, to live with the dignity that every human being is entitled to by the law of the source. Do not be vague about what you want, because vagueness in the what produces vagueness in the result. The formless substance needs direction. Give it the specific destination of your desire. Include the emotional tone within the definition of your what. The what is not just a number or a condition, it is a feeling. It is the feeling of waking up and knowing that supply is flowing. The feeling of checking the account and finding increase rather than shortage. The feeling of acting from abundance rather than from scarcity. The feeling of giving from surplus rather than calculating from deficit. Include this feeling in your definition of the what, because the feeling is the carrier of the signal. When the what is felt as well as stated, the impression on the formless substance is complete in a way that words alone cannot achieve. Include source connection in your definition of the what. This means acknowledging within the signal itself that the supply does not come from your own calculation and effort alone. It comes through channels that the source opens, through the invisible field of infinite provision from which Wattles taught that all visible wealth is drawn. When you include the source in your signal, you place the how in the right hands. You are not ordering from a limited supply managed by your own limited perception. You are ordering from an infinite supply managed by an intelligence that can see every channel your mind has missed. This acknowledgement is not passive. It is the most powerful element of the what. Include receiving openness in the definition. Receiving openness means that your signal does not specify the exact form or channel through which the what must arrive. You define the amount, the feeling, the nature of the supply, but you leave the route entirely open. You say, in effect, this is what I am receiving, and I am open to it arriving through any channel the source chooses to use. This openness is essential because the cancelling signal often hides inside channel restriction. When you decide that money can only come through one specific visible source, and that source closes, you have effectively cancelled the signal. Receiving openness keeps every door available. Include action readiness in the definition of the what. This means your signal communicates not just the desire to receive, but the readiness to cooperate with the delivery through aligned action. You are not asking to have wealth placed in your lap while you remain passive. You are signaling that you are watching for the channels, that you are prepared to walk through the nearest open door, that you will act on the perception that the clear signal will produce. Action readiness is part of the what because it tells the source that the receiver is not only expecting delivery, but is positioned to cooperate with it when the channel appears. Write out your complete what signal. Put it in writing, read it in the morning, Return to it at any moment when the cancelling signal attempts to interrupt it. The what is your anchor. It is the specific instruction you have decided to give to the formless substance, and every element of your inner and outer life must be moved gradually and persistently into alignment with it. The thought must return to it. The feeling must embody it. The speech must reflect it. The expectation must assume it. The action must enact it. When all 5 elements of the signal converge on the same what, the formless substance has received an instruction so clear that the law cannot do anything other than move the supply in response. The what is not a wish. A wish is held with the lightness of something you would enjoy but do not truly expect. The what is a command, held with the certainty of something you know to be in motion. Wattles understood the difference between wishing and commanding, and he built his entire teaching on the distinction. The wish broadcasts from a place of absence. The command broadcasts from a place of authority. The wish says, perhaps this might come. The command says, this is coming, and my entire signal is aligned with its arrival. This is the difference the what must carry, not the lightness of a wish, but the weight of a genuine inner order, placed with the full authority of one who knows the law. Finally, and this must be said with the full seriousness it deserves, do not change the what every week. Consistency is the key to dominance, and dominance is the key to the wealth signal. Every time you change the what, you are sending a new signal to the formless substance before the previous signal had time to gather the momentum of a dominant impression. Choose the what that is true to your genuine desire and your genuine need. Hold it. Return to it. Deepen it. Let the feeling of it grow more real over time rather than searching constantly for a new version. The what that is held steadily for days and weeks and months becomes a deep groove in the formless substance, and deep grooves produce reliable deliveries. Once the what has been defined, the next movement of the practical protocol is the release of the how. This is where many sincere prosperity students stumble, because the release of the how feels, to the calculating mind, like irresponsibility, like giving up control, like trusting blindly. But Wattles was precise about this. The release of the how is not the abdication of responsibility. It is the proper assignment of responsibility. The source manages the channels. You manage the signal. When you attempt to manage the channels as well, you are doing the source's work while neglecting your own, and neither job gets done well. The signal disruptors in this subsection are the but sentences, and we have already introduced them in the open loop. Now they must be named with full clarity so that you can recognize them in your own inner dialogue and in your own spoken words. The first signal disruptor is, but I do not know how. This sentence sounds honest. It sounds like a simple acknowledgement of uncertainty, but in the economy of the signal, it is a command of lack. It says, the supply cannot come because the route is not yet visible, and the law, which would have found the route through invisible channels, receives an instruction from the receiver that says, the invisible channels are not permitted. The how must be known before the supply can arrive. This closes the delivery before it begins. The second signal disruptor is, but nothing is happening. This is the report of visible evidence submitted as an argument against the signal. Nothing visible has moved, and therefore the conclusion is that nothing invisible is moving either. But Wattles understood that the invisible and the visible operate on different timelines. The invisible supply may be entirely in motion, while the visible world has not yet reflected that motion. The interval between the sending of the signal and the visible arrival of the supply is not emptiness, it is preparation. But nothing is happening sends a cancellation into that interval, disrupting the preparation before the delivery can be completed. The third signal disruptor is, but I always fail. This is the past reaching into the present with the authority of track record. Every previous failure is assembled into a case against the current signal. History becomes the argument for the impossibility of the what, but the law does not operate on the basis of your history. It operates on the basis of your current dominant signal. If the past can be used to justify a fear signal today, the fear signal will create more events for the past to use as evidence tomorrow. The cycle of failure is broken not by the absence of past failure, but by the refusal to let past failure define the present signal. The fourth signal disruptor is, But I am too old, or too young, or too far behind, or too different from those who succeed. These are identity disruptors. They insert a personal limitation argument into the signal that says that what you have ordered is outside the range of what someone like you can receive. The law does not recognize these categories. The law responds to the signal, not to the age or history or demographic of the sender. When Wattles wrote about the certain way, he did not list conditions of eligibility. He described a law that operates on the basis of signal. Any person at any stage of life holding the right signal is eligible for the supply. The eligibility is in the signal, not in the identity category. The fifth signal disruptor is, but no one helps me. This is a perception error created by a contracted signal. When the signal is divided, the perception of channels is limited, and the help that is available through unexpected sources cannot be recognized. The contracted perception sees only the familiar visible channels and finds them closed. The clear signal opens perception to the full range of channels, including those operated by people the mind would not have predicted. But no one helps me becomes self-confirming when the signal is divided, because the divided signal cannot see the help that is present. Clearing the signal opens the perception, and open perception finds the help that the contracted mind declared absent. The replacement for all 5 signal disruptors is a single statement that must be returned to every time one of them appears. The source knows the channel. I hold the signal. This statement performs 2 vital functions simultaneously. It correctly assigns the routing of supply to the source, which removes the mind's impossible burden of figuring out the how. And it clearly states the viewer's responsibility, holding the signal, which is the only job that the viewer was ever meant to have in this process. When the fear of not knowing the how arises, this statement is the correction. When the frustration of no visible movement arises, this statement is the correction. When the old identity argues its limitations, this statement is the correction. Releasing the how is an ongoing practice, not a one-time decision. The mind will return to the how repeatedly. It will attempt to calculate. It will generate new plans, new strategies, new visible channel approaches. And those plans and strategies are not necessarily wrong. Aligned action is essential, but the plan must serve the command, not replace it. When you find yourself spending more mental and emotional energy on the how than on the what, the signal has shifted from command to calculation. The practice of release is the regular return from calculation to command, from strategy to signal, from the mind's map to the source's route. When you release the how genuinely, something unexpected often happens. Ideas begin to arrive that the calculating mind would never have produced. Connections appear that no strategy would have identified. A door opens in a direction you were not watching. This is not coincidence. It is the natural result of a perception that has been freed from the tunnel vision of fear-based planning and opened to the full range of channels through which the invisible supply can move. The release of the how is not a relaxation of effort. It is an elevation of perception. Hand-elevated perception sees more of the available supply than the contracted mind ever could. The source knows the channel. This is not a platitude. It is a statement of law. The source, the formless substance from which all visible wealth is drawn, has access to every channel in the invisible supply network. Every person who might become a collaborator, every idea that might become an income stream, every connection that might open a new market, every unexpected reversal of a closed door, every new form that supply has not yet taken but is capable of taking. The source knows all of it. Your role is not to map it all in advance. Your role is to hold the signal clearly enough and steadily enough that when the source opens the next channel, your perception is open enough to recognize it and your action is aligned enough to walk through it. The steady signal produces surprise, not confusion, not randomness, but the specific kind of unexpected arrival that is characteristic of supply moving through invisible channels rather than through the visible routes the mind had planned. When you have been practicing the divided signal, you have been living in a contracted world where supply is expected, if at all, through the same familiar channels. When you clean up the signal and hold it steadily, the world expands. New channels appear, and the supply that arrives often does so in forms that the calculating mind could not have anticipated, which is why it registers as surprise. A message arrives. Someone you have not heard from in months or years reaches out with something that turns out to be exactly the channel through which the next delivery of supply flows. You did not plan this. You did not engineer it. You held the signal, and the signal opened the perception, and the perception noticed the message, and the action followed, and the supply moved. This is the supply chain of the invisible mechanism made visible in a single, unexpected exchange. The message is not random. It is the channel. And the clean signal is what allowed you to be in the right state to receive it when it arrived. An idea comes that you did not strategize. You are not sitting at your desk trying to solve the financial problem. You are in a state of held signal, of quiet certainty, of the particular mental atmosphere that Wattles associated with a certain way. And into that atmosphere, an idea arrives. A specific, actionable, wealth-aligned idea that your contracted fear mind would never have produced because it was too busy calculating the limitations. The idea is a channel. The open signal is what made you available to receive it. Expect these ideas, not as rewards for good behavior, but as the natural output of a perception that has been freed from the tunnel of fear. An old connection re-emerges. Someone from a previous chapter of your life appears at exactly the moment when the signal has aligned in the direction of a specific what. This is not sentimentality. This is the invisible supply network operating through human channels. People are channels. Relationships are channels. Old connections are channels. The source has access to all of them. The steady signal that you send does not only influence your own perception, it contributes to the opening of channels that exist in the relationships and networks and possibilities that surround your life. The old connection who appears is not coincidence. They are the channel the signal directed, a refund, an unexpected return, a correction in your financial accounts, a reversal of a previous loss. These small financial surprises are not always small in their signal significance. They are the formless substance delivering supply through a channel that required no new external action from you. They arrive as confirmation that the signal is working, not as the full delivery, but as the evidence that the law is operating and that the supply is in motion. Receive them with the gratitude and recognition they deserve, not as lucky accidents, but as the law at work in its characteristic precision. A customer appears when no marketing was done, when no promotion was sent, when the visible channel of outreach was quiet. They found you through a channel the source opened. Their arrival is the signal at work. Receive them with the full energy of a person whose signal is clear, not with the anxious desperation of someone who has been starving for a sale, but with the calm welcome of one who expected exactly this kind of arrival and is ready to serve well. The state in which you receive the customer is part of the signal. A desperate reception sends a desperation signal. A supplied reception sends a supply signal. Expect the customer. Welcome them from supply. A collaboration emerges that was not planned. Two signals align and a channel opens between them. The invisible supply moves through partnerships and collaborations that the calculating mind working alone could never have constructed. The steady signal makes you visible to other steady signals. It makes you available as a channel for others' supply, while simultaneously opening you as a receiver of supply through theirs. Expect collaboration, not because you have engineered it, but because the source, which sees every channel, knows where two aligned signals can create a delivery that neither could produce alone. An unexpected inner impulse arrives with unusual clarity and force. Not the scrambled urgency of fear-based planning, but the clean, directed impulse of a mind aligned with its signal. This is the inner knowing that Wattles described as the guidance that comes to those who are in the certain way. The impulse says, do this now, contact this person, write this piece, make this offer, take this step, and because the signal is clear and the perception is open, the impulse is recognized for what it is. A delivery instruction from the source to the receiver. Follow it. Not frantically, but firmly. The impulse aligned with the signal is the nearest open door presenting itself for entry. The signal without action is incomplete. Wattles was deeply serious about this. He did not teach passive reception. He taught the certain way, And the certain way includes action, specific, aligned, supply-based action, taken in response to the channels the signal has made visible. The wealth signal does not do the work for you. It prepares the perceptual and invisible conditions through which the work becomes effective. But the work must be done. The door must be walked through. The message must be answered. The offer must be made. The signal must become embodied in a physical movement that completes the instruction to the formless substance. Answer the message. When the channel arrives in the form of a message from a person who may be the beginning of the next delivery, answer it. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Not when you have calculated whether it is worth your time. Answer it from the state of supply, with the energy of someone who recognizes a channel and is cooperating with its opening. The message is not an interruption. It is a delivery. The action of answering it is the action that moves supply from the invisible to the visible. The message unanswered is a channel closed from the receiver's side. Make the offer. If you have been waiting for certainty before making the offer, for a sign that it will be received positively, for evidence that the timing is right, you have been waiting for visible confirmation before sending the signal of action. The offer is the action. The offer made from a state of supply, from the expectation of a receiver who knows the signal is working and that channels are opening, is a different offer than one made from desperation. The words may be similar. The energy is entirely different. Make the offer from supply. Let the signal be in the action. Publish the work. If you have been holding your work back, waiting until it is perfect, waiting until you are certain it will be well received, waiting until you feel confident enough to be visible, you have been allowing fear to cancel the channel. Your work is a channel. Publishing it is the action that opens the channel. The formless substance cannot move supply through an unpublished work, a withheld offering, a gift held back from the world because the fear of rejection was louder than the signal of supply. The nearest door, in many cases, is the decision to make what you have created visible to those who need it. Accept the invitation. When an opportunity arrives in a form smaller or less prestigious or less conventional than what you imagined the delivery would look like, accept it. Not because it is the final form of your supply, but because it is the open door. The open door leads somewhere, and where it leads is not visible from where you are standing. The source has prepared the route, and the invitation is the first step on that route. The person who declines the small invitation, because it does not look like the full delivery, has rejected the channel. The person who accepts it, with the grateful alertness of someone who recognizes a channel, finds themselves somewhere in a week or a month that they could not have planned their way to. Follow up. The channel that was partially opened through a previous action often requires a follow-up action to complete the opening. The signal was sent, the first door was entered, but the follow-up was not made because the fear returned and said it was too forward, too needy, too presumptuous. Fear does not follow up. Supply follows up. A person whose signal is certain follows up with the calm confidence of someone who knows they have something of value to offer and that the timing of the follow-up is simply the next step in the cooperation with the supply that is in motion. Follow up. The channel may have been waiting for exactly that action. Ask clearly. If you have been communicating your offering in vague, apologetic, or indirect terms, because the fear of being too direct is louder than the signal of supply, the channel is being muffled by the same fear that muffles the signal. Clarity of asking mirrors clarity of signal. When you ask clearly, specifically, and without the apologetic hedging of someone who does not expect to receive, you send a signal that matches the wealth signal you have been working to stabilize. Ask for what is needed. Name the amount. State the offer. Extend the invitation. Clarity in the outer communication reflects clarity in the inner signal, and that reflection is part of the embodiment that completes the law. Organize your finances as a person who expects more supply to arrive. This is one of the most practical and most overlooked forms of aligned action. When your finances are in disarray, the signal you send is one of a person who does not expect supply to be present. When you organize, review, prepare, and maintain your financial affairs with the care and attention of someone who anticipates increase, you are taking an action that embodies the wealth signal in the physical world. You are acting as supplied. You are making room for the delivery. And the formless substance responding to the dominant impression receives the signal of a receiver who is prepared and expecting. Act as supplied, not desperate. This is the summary instruction for this entire subsection, and it is the one that ties every action to the signal from which it must come. Every action you take in the direction of your financial life should be examined through this lens. Am I taking this action from the state of a person who knows supply is coming and is cooperating with its arrival? Or am I taking this action from the state of a person who is terrified that supply will not come and is trying to force it through frantic movement? The action may look the same from outside, but the signal embedded in it is entirely different. Supply-based action moves the law. Desperation-based action moves the fear signal. Act as supplied, always. Not because the evidence has yet arrived, but because the command has been given and the law is operating. The most sophisticated form of signal interference is not obvious fear. Obvious fear is recognizable and correctable. The most sophisticated form is the fear that has convinced itself it is wisdom, the fear that says it is being realistic, the fear that presents itself as the careful, mature, responsible counterweight to what it calls your naivety. This is the false safety trap. It is the mechanism by which fear purchases the authority of wisdom and uses that authority to cancel the wealth signal before the viewer ever recognizes what has happened. Fear says, "Prepare for lack." This seems prudent. It seems like the kind of thinking that prevents devastation. Why would you not prepare for the possibility that supply does not arrive? But Wattles would point out that preparing for lack is not the same as being practically responsible. Preparing for lack means organizing your inner life around the expectation of shortage. It means your dominant signal is the anticipation of what will not come rather than the expectation of what is coming. Practical responsibility means managing what you have with wisdom while holding the signal of supply. These are different things. One changes the signal, one does not. Faith says, "Prepare for supply." This is not denial of present circumstances. It is the inner decision to organize your life around the expectation of increase rather than the anticipation of shortage. It is the decision that shapes your perception, your speech, your action, and your expectation in the direction of supply. Preparing for supply means creating the space for it, the mental openness, the practical readiness, the relational availability that allows the channels the source opens to be received when they appear. This is not passivity. It is the active readiness of a person whose signal is clear and whose life is organized around the expectation of the delivery they have ordered. Fear hoards. When fear is dominant, the first response to any supply that does arrive is to grip it, protect it, hold it back from circulation. Because if you release what little you have, fear says, you will have nothing left. But Wattles understood that wealth circulates. Supply that is hoarded from fear sends a fear signal. It signals to the formless substance that the receiver does not trust more to come, which is precisely the divided signal that prevents more from coming. Faith circulates wisely, not recklessly, not without discernment, but with the trust of a person who knows that the law of supply is not exhausted by one delivery, and that releasing supply in alignment with the signal creates space for more to flow. Fear hides. The person dominated by fear makes themselves smaller, quieter, less visible. They pull back from opportunities for exposure because the fear of judgment, rejection, or failure is louder than the signal of supply. But Wattles taught that wealth requires visibility. You cannot be the channel of supply if you are hidden from the people through whom the supply might flow. Faith becomes visible, not loudly, not arrogantly, but with the quiet confidence of one who knows their what and is walking toward it with the steady signal of a person who expects channels to open. Fear contracts presence. Faith expands it. Fear contracts channels. When fear is the dominant signal, the perception of channels narrows. The mind sees only the familiar visible routes and finds them closed. The invisible channels remain unperceived because the fear signal is too loud to allow the perceptual openness that channel recognition requires. The contracted perception of fear looks at the same landscape as the open perception of faith and sees a fundamentally different world. One sees closure everywhere, the other sees openings that the first was not equipped to notice. Fear contracts the very perceptual capacity that is required to receive through unexpected channels. Faith recognizes channels. The open perception of a unified faith signal sees the landscape differently. It notices the message that came from an unexpected direction. It recognizes the conversation that contains a channel. It acts on the impulse that arrives in the clarity of a signal-aligned mind. It welcomes the small door that fear would have dismissed as beneath consideration. The capacity to recognize channels is not a talent or a gift given to some and withheld from others. It is the natural perceptual result of a clear, unified, fear-free signal. Faith does not create the channels. It creates the seeing that makes the channels available to the receiver. The false safety trap must be named every time it appears. When fear presents itself as wisdom and caution and realism, the discipline is to examine the signal it is creating, not the argument it is making. The signal. What is this thought transmitting to the formless substance? If the answer is lack, shortage, limitation, or the cancellation of supply, it is not wisdom. It is fear in a very convincing costume. Real wisdom aligns with the signal of supply while managing present resources with care. Real wisdom says the source provides. I manage what has arrived and remain open to more. That is the distinction. And maintaining it in daily life is the practice of breaking the false safety trap, one fear dressed as wisdom moment at a time. A divided signal does not just fail to attract supply. It actively rejects supply that has already arrived at the door. This is one of the most painful recognitions in all of Wattles' teaching because it means that the viewer who has been lamenting the absence of wealth may in fact have turned away deliveries that were already on the threshold. Not consciously, not deliberately, but through the reflexive rejection mechanisms of a divided signal that cannot recognize a channel when it appears in an unexpected form. They ask for money but mistrust the offer when it arrives. The offer comes. Perhaps it is not exactly what was imagined. Perhaps the terms are not perfectly aligned with the plan. Perhaps the person making it is not the person who was expected to make it. And the mistrust activates. The signal that was set to receive has flipped to a different transmission. This could be a mistake. This does not feel right. This is not how I expected it. And the offer, which was a genuine channel of supply, is declined. The delivery is rejected. The channel closes. And the viewer returns to waiting for the supply that has just left through the door they refuse to open. They ask for clients, but avoid visibility. The desire for clients is real, and the prayer for them is genuine. But visibility requires courage, and the fear signal says that visibility risks rejection, so the offering is held back. The platform is not used. The work is not published. The invitation is not extended. The channel through which clients might arrive remains closed from the receiver's side. And the signal that asked for clients is simultaneously creating the conditions in which clients cannot find the one who invited them. The asking and the refusing exist in the same signal, and the signal delivers exactly the result they create together. They ask for abundance but undercharge. This is one of the most common and most costly forms of rejected delivery. The wealth signal asks for abundance, but the moment the opportunity to receive arrives in the form of a transaction, the old poverty identity enters and reduces the charge, because part of the divided signal believes that asking for the full value of what is offered is wrong, or risky, or likely to be rejected. So the number is reduced. The supply is reduced. The signal of receiving abundance and the action of charging for scarcity create a contradiction that the law resolves inevitably in the direction of the more powerfully felt instruction, which is the undercharge rooted in the poverty identity. They ask for opportunity but say no because it is small. What they have defined is large. The channel the source has opened is small. An early conversation, a small project, a single connection that leads nowhere obvious. And the response is no, because this does not match the scale of what was ordered. But the large opportunity often arrives through the small channel. The small project is the door. The initial conversation is the beginning of the channel. The single connection is the person who knows the person who holds the key to the what. When the small channel is refused because it does not look like the full delivery, the route to the full delivery is interrupted. They ask for help, but reject the help when it arrives. The prayer is sincere. The desire for assistance is genuine. But when help is offered in a form that requires humility or effort or the acknowledgement of need, the divided signal activates the pride or the skepticism or the fear of obligation, and the help is declined. This is not strength. In the economy of the signal, this is the closing of a channel that took a great deal of invisible preparation to open. Help refused from pride sends a signal that says, supply is not welcomed in human form, and that signal closes the very channels through which much of the invisible supply moves, because invisible supply very often arrives through visible people. They ask for source, but obey fear. The faith is spoken, the trust is declared, the prayer is offered. But when fear makes its case, it wins. Fear says, do not take the risk. Fear says, wait for certainty. Fear says, protect what little remains. And the obedience to fear, even while speaking to source, is a signal that says what is ultimately in command here is fear, not faith. The source receives the obeyed signal, not the spoken one, and the obeyed signal is fear. This is perhaps the most fundamental form of rejected delivery because it happens at the level of ultimate authority. Whose voice ultimately governs the action, the source or the fear? Whichever one is obeyed is the one that runs the signal. They ask for change, but repeat old action. The desire for a different financial life is real. The prayer for transformation is sincere. But the actions of tomorrow are identical to the actions of yesterday. The same approaches, the same channels, the same habits, the same responses to the same triggers. And the supply system, which moves in response to the signal, receives the old signal embedded in the old action and continues to produce the old result. Change requires that the new signal be embodied in new action, not frantic activity, not random experimentation, but the aligned action of a person whose signal has shifted and whose movement through the world reflects that shift in specific, recognizable, practical ways. They ask for wealth, but speak poverty. This is the clearest and most complete form of rejected delivery. The signal of wealth is sent in prayer and affirmation, and then the mouth opens in ordinary conversation and the poverty signal is sent. Money is always a problem. I can never get ahead. Things never seem to work out for me. Every bill is a catastrophe. Every shortage is a prediction of permanent lack. The spoken word, as Florence Scovel Shinn understood with great precision, is not merely a report on conditions. It is an order to the invisible supply. And when the order placed in prayer is spoken poverty in conversation, the spoken word, repeated many more times throughout the day, becomes the dominant signal. The wealth prayer is the exception. The poverty speech is the rule. Now we name the cancelling signal fully and precisely. It is not one sentence but a family of sentences, each of which operates as a command in reverse. Each of which, when spoken or thought, sends a clear instruction to the formless substance that is the exact opposite of the wealth what that has been defined and held. These sentences are familiar. You know them. You have spoken them. And once you know what they are doing in the economy of the signal, you cannot unhear that knowledge. Every time these sentences arise, they will be recognizable. And recognition is the beginning of correction. Nothing is coming. This sentence is the denial of the delivery in motion. It reports the silence between the signal and the visible arrival as the confirmation of failure. When spoken or thought, it sends the instruction, cancel the order. I have lost faith in the law. I do not believe the delivery is real. The formless substance receives this as a withdrawal of the command. And a withdrawn command produces exactly the nothing that the sentence predicted. The sentence is not a report, it is a self-fulfilling order. This will not work. This is the command of failure sent before the outcome is visible. It does not wait for evidence. It generates its own conclusion from the feeling of doubt and sends that conclusion as instruction to the invisible supply network. When this sentence is dominant, the perception closes. The channels become unrecognizable. The actions become hesitant and incomplete, and the result that arrives confirms what was commanded. This did not work. Not because the law failed, but because the signal succeeded in delivering exactly what it most consistently transmitted. I am always behind. This sentence creates an identity of perpetual shortage. It assigns the viewer a permanent position relative to the supply they desire, and that position is always behind, always catching up, always arriving too late. When this identity is dominant, the signal transmits it fully. The formless substance responding to the dominant impression continues to create conditions that match the identity of someone who is always behind. The identity must be broken. The sentence must be caught and replaced, not occasionally, but every time it appears, until the new identity of the steady receiver becomes the dominant signal. It is too late. This sentence imposes a time limit on the law that the law does not recognize. The law has no expiration. The formless substance does not check the age of the requester or the amount of time that has passed since the desire first arose. It responds to the current dominant signal. It is too late is not a fact about the law. It is a fear sentence that sounds like wisdom and operates as a command of closure. Every time it is sent, it narrows the perception further and reduces the range of channels the mind is open to receiving through. No such limit exists in the law, only in the sentence. I cannot receive. This is the identity of a closed receiver. When this sentence is dominant, even if supply manages to reach the doorstep through an aligned channel, the receiver is not in the state of receiving. The perception is not open. The recognition is not active. The action of welcome is not taken. Supply passes by a door that has declared itself closed to delivery. Wattles would call this one of the most direct forms of self-defeat in the spiritual prosperity vocabulary. Because it takes the one condition the receiver controls, the state of openness, and actively closes it precisely when the law was preparing to deliver. Money never stays. This is the command of impermanence imposed on supply. When this sentence is dominant, every arrival of money is shadowed by the expectation of its departure. The signal sent to the formless substance is not one of stable, ongoing supply. It is one of supply that arrives briefly and then leaves. And the law responding to the dominant signal continues to create exactly that pattern. Money arrives and departs. The cycle repeats not because it is your fate, but because the signal commands it. The sentence must be replaced with one that speaks of increasing and abiding supply, held long enough to become the dominant instruction. The correction practice is not complicated. It is not a lengthy ritual. It is a specific, repeatable daily discipline that anyone with genuine commitment to the wealth signal can apply in the exact moment the cancelling signal appears. Its power is not in its complexity. Its power is in its consistency. The viewer who applies this practice every time the fear signal appears and applies it again the next time and the time after that is the viewer whose dominant signal gradually shifts from division to unity, from contradiction to command, from a broadcast of fear to a transmission of certainty. Step 1. Catch the fear sentence. This requires the development of a new kind of inner listening. Not the listening that evaluates whether the fear makes sense, which is how most people engage with their fear thoughts, but the listening that hears what signal is being sent to the formless substance. When a thought or a spoken sentence carries the energy of lack, shortage, failure, closure, unworthiness, or permanent limitation, catch it. Name it, not to shame yourself, but to identify it clearly as a fear signal rather than a wealth signal. You cannot correct what you have not recognized. The catching is the beginning of the correction. Step 2. Stop speaking it. Once the fear sentence has been caught, do not continue to speak it. Not in the conversation you are having. Not in the inner monologue running beneath it. The spoken fear sentence is a reinforcement of the fear signal, and every additional repetition deepens the groove it has worn in the dominant signal. Stopping the speech is not the same as pretending the fear does not exist. It is the decision to stop giving the fear sentence the power of your voice, which is the most direct channel from the inner signal to the outer world. Stop speaking it. Then replace it. Step 3. Replace with the wealth signal. The replacement is not a vague positive thought. It is the specific wealth signal you have defined in the protocol of this teaching. It is the sentence, "My wealth signal is money moves toward me through channels source opens," or the declaration, "The source knows the channel. I hold the signal," or the correction phrase, "I send one signal only. Wealth moves toward me." The replacement must be specific. It must be felt. It must be returned to with the calm firmness of a person who is choosing the signal they will hold today, regardless of what the fear sentence was trying to command. Step 4. Feel the replacement. The spoken replacement is important, but the felt replacement is essential. Return to the emotional atmosphere of supply. Return to the feeling of a receiver who knows the delivery is coming. Not the feeling of desperation or forced optimism, but the genuine warmth of one who knows the law and trusts it. Let that feeling inhabit the body as fully as possible in the moment following the correction. The feeling is the carrier frequency, and the carrier frequency of the replacement must be the one that the wealth signal requires. Calm, deep, rooted certainty. Step 5. Take one aligned action. Following the felt replacement, take one physical action that is aligned with the signal of supply. Send one message. Organize one element of your financial life. Follow up on one open opportunity. Publish one piece of your offering. Make one clear request. The action does not have to be large, it has to be aligned. It has to carry the signal of a person who is cooperating with a delivery already in motion. One aligned action after the correction of the fear sentence embodies the wealth signal in the physical world and closes the loop of the correction practice. Step 6. Repeat until the wealth signal becomes dominant. Not once, not twice, every time. Day after day, moment after moment when the fear returns. The correction practice is not a one-time event. It is the consistent discipline of signal maintenance applied to a mind that has been habituated to fear and must be gradually and persistently retrained towards supply. The repetition of the practice is exactly what Wattles meant by dominant impression. The impression becomes dominant through the consistent return to it and the consistent correction of every signal that competes with it. This is the work. And this work is the most important work you will ever do in the direction of financial transformation. You are a steady transmitter. This is your new financial identity, and it is not a title earned by perfect performance. It is an identity chosen by conscious decision and maintained by consistent practice. The steady transmitter does not send a flawless signal every moment of every day. The steady transmitter is the one who returns to the signal, corrects the fear sentence, refeels the certainty of supply, and continues the discipline of unified broadcasting across all 5 elements of thought, feeling, speech, expectation, and action. Steadiness is not perfection, it is return, and return is available to you in every moment, including this one. The new financial identity says, "I do not broadcast lack while asking for wealth." This is not a declaration of arrival. It is a declaration of practice. It says, "I have seen the divided signal. I have recognized the cost of the contradiction. I have understood the law that Wattles laid out with such precision, and I am choosing, from this point forward, to align my inner broadcast with what I have defined, to catch the fear sentence when it appears, to replace it with the wealth signal, to act from supply rather than from desperation, and to hold the frequency through the silence with the certainty of one who knows the law does not fail. My signal is one. Let this become a lived reality rather than a spoken aspiration. The signal is one when thought, feeling, speech, expectation, and action are all pointed in the same direction. Not perfectly synchronized at every moment, but dominantly unified. The fear will arise. The doubt will arrive. The visible world will continue to present its evidence. And the response to all of it is the return. The signal is one. Every time it is divided by fear, the correction brings it back to one. Over time, the return becomes faster, the division becomes shorter, and the dominant signal becomes genuinely unified in the way that the formless substance can respond to with full force. I think, speak, expect, and act from supply. This is the identity in its complete form. Not I try to think from supply. Or I sometimes speak from supply when the evidence cooperates. The identity is full. It covers all four of the remaining elements beyond the signal of feeling, which is the atmosphere that holds them all together. The thought returns to supply when fear pulls it toward lack. The speech corrects when poverty language appears. The expectation remains open when the timing is not yet visible. The action embodies supply when the temptation to act from desperation arises. This is the full identity of the steady transmitter. This is who you are becoming through this practice. The identity is not claimed once. It is rebuilt each morning and maintained through the day and recommitted to each time the fear returns. This is not a weakness in the system. It is the nature of inner transformation. The formless substance is patient. It responds to the dominant signal, and the dominant signal is built through the accumulation of every correct return. Every morning you claim the identity, it deepens. Every fear sentence you catch and replace, the groove of the wealth signal deepens. Every aligned action you take from supply rather than desperation, the identity solidifies. You are building the new financial self, not through a single dramatic decision, but through the steady, daily devotional practice of returning to the signal. The old identity, the one that checked the account with terror and planned with dread and spoke poverty and expected disappointment, does not disappear overnight. It has been the default for a long time, and it will offer itself as a return address many times in the coming days and weeks. The practice of the new identity is simply this. Do not check back in. When the fear invites you back to the old address, recognize the invitation for what it is, a signal disruptor arriving with the authority of habit, and redirect to the new address. My signal is one. I am a steady transmitter. Wealth moves toward me through the channels source opens. Return to that identity every time the old one knocks. Gradually and then unmistakably, the new identity becomes the dominant one. You have been sent a signal in every direction, and now you know the law that governs where it goes and what it produces. The first principle of this entire teaching is foundational. You are always sending a signal. Not just in prayer, not just in affirmation, not just in the moments of conscious intention, but in every thought you hold when no one is watching, in every feeling that rises when the bill arrives, in every word spoken in ordinary conversation, in every action taken from fear or from supply. The signal is continuous, and the formless substance is continuously responsive to it. Desire is not enough. This was the belief disruption at the heart of Section 3, and it must be fully owned by the time you leave this teaching. The intensity of your desire does not create the wealth signal. The quality and consistency of your dominant inner broadcast does. You may want wealth with everything in you and still be sending a divided signal if the desire is resting on a foundation of fear. The desire must be transformed into a clear, felt, believed command held dominantly across all 5 signal elements. That is the difference between wishing and the certain way. Dominant thought becomes instruction. This is the mechanism Wattles identified at the center of his system. The thought that dominates your inner life, the one you return to most automatically, the one your emotions confirm most consistently, the one your speech reinforces most regularly, is the thought that is actually doing the creative work in the formless substance. You cannot override the dominant thought with occasional affirmations. You must change the dominant thought by making the wealth signal the one you return to most consistently until it outweighs every competing thought and becomes the true instruction being sent to the invisible supply. Fear cancels. This cannot be overstated. Fear in all its forms, the fear of lack, the fear of failure, the fear of unworthiness, the fear that sounds like realism and caution and protective wisdom, is a cancellation signal. Every time fear enters any one of the 5 signal elements, it introduces a command to the formless substance that works against the wealth order. It does not matter how sincere the wealth desire is. The fear signal, when dominant, cancels the wealth instruction. This is not cruelty, it is law, and the law is correctable, but it must be taken seriously. Fear is not a minor inconvenience in the wealth signal, it is the primary obstacle. Certainty stabilizes. Certainty is the signal quality that the formless substance responds to with the full force of the law behind it. Not certainty that things will work out in the exact way the mind has planned. Certainty that the law operates, that the source knows the channels, that the what has been commanded and the delivery is in motion. This certainty must be held through silence, through delay, through visible evidence of shortage, through the arguments of the calculating mind. Certainty held through all of that is dominance, and dominance is the creative instruction that moves wealth from the invisible to the visible. Wealth moves toward the steady signal. This is the closing principle of the recap, and it is the central promise of this entire teaching, as Wattles understood it, and as this interpreter has spent this teaching laying out. The signal is the cause. Wealth is the effect. Not wealth as a reward for good character, not wealth as a lucky accident. Wealth as the natural law-governed response of the formless substance to a clear, steady, unified inner instruction. You do not have to deserve it. You do not have to earn it through suffering. You have to send the signal that aligns with it. And when that signal is steady, wealth moves. This is the law. You are not to leave this teaching with guilt. If anything in this teaching has revealed a pattern in you that you did not previously recognize, a divided signal, a canceling sentence, a rejected delivery, that recognition is not a reason for self-condemnation. It is a reason for gratitude. Because to see the pattern is to be above it. The moment you can name the fear signal, you are no longer fully inside it. The moment you can catch the but sentence, you have already moved into the position of the observer who can correct it. Clarity about the error is not evidence of how badly you have failed. It is the beginning of how completely you can change. You do not need to be perfect to receive. This must be said clearly and warmly. The law does not require a flawless transmitter. It requires a dominant one. The viewer who sends the wealth signal imperfectly but consistently, who catches the fear sentence not every time but more often than before, who returns to the what with genuine feeling even when the feeling is not as full as it once was. That viewer is building the dominant impression that the law responds to. Progress is not perfection. Progress is the gradual shift of the dominant signal from division toward unity. And that shift, once it has begun, is irreversible if the practice is continued. The change you are making is a change of inner life, and inner life changes not through a single dramatic breakthrough, but through the accumulation of daily returns. Every morning you choose the signal. You have added to the dominant impression. Every fear sentence you catch and replace, you have deepened the groove of the wealth signal. Every aligned action you take from supply rather than desperation, you have embodied the identity of the steady transmitter in the physical world. These accumulations are not invisible. They build into a life that is qualitatively different from the one that was being lived inside the divided signal. And the difference will become visible in ways that you cannot fully predict because the channels are not yours to plan. You have been carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. The weight of calculating the how, the weight of forcing the supply through visible channels, the weight of managing the formless substance's job on top of your own, the weight of the divided signal that held faith in one hand and fear in the other, and wondered why neither hand could fully grasp the supply that was available. That weight can be set down, not through denial, not through pretending the bills do not exist or the pressure is not real, through the genuine transfer of the routing responsibility to the source and the genuine assumption of the signal responsibility by you. That is the division of labor that the law has always required. And today, you know what your job is. The supply has not stopped. The channels have not been permanently closed. The law has not been suspended for your specific situation. The formless substance from which Wattles taught that all visible wealth is drawn is not less available to you than it has ever been to anyone who has received from it. The supply is present. The channels are real. The law is operating right now in every dimension of the invisible world. What may have been missing is the steady signal, and the steady signal is not a rare gift given only to the few. It is a discipline available to every person who will practice it consistently enough and seriously enough, and long enough for the dominant impression to take hold. Begin today. Not when the fear is gone, because the fear may never be entirely gone, and the practice is designed to operate in the presence of the fear, not in its absence. Begin with the fear present and correct it. Begin with the doubt visible and return from it to the signal. Begin with the evidence against you and hold the frequency anyway. The beginning is not a perfect first day. The beginning is the decision to practice the correction every time the cancelling signal appears, and to keep practicing it regardless of how many times the correction is needed. That decision, made seriously and held persistently, is the beginning of the wealth signal in its most powerful form. For 7 days, you are invited into a specific practice that will test and build the wealth signal more directly than any amount of listening or reading alone. The practice is simple, it is demanding, and it is designed to reveal the exact frequency and force of the cancelling signal in your specific life, so that you can address it with the precision this teaching has provided. For 7 days, when fear speaks, whether as a thought, a sentence, a feeling, or an expectation of lack, you will say these words, aloud if possible, silently if necessary. I send one signal only. Wealth moves toward me. Say them fully. Feel them. Do not allow the fear sentence to stand unchallenged. Meet it every time with the correction. Track every contradiction. Not to accumulate evidence of your failure, but to build an accurate map of the specific fear signals that have been dominant in your life. You will find patterns. There will be certain times of day when the cancelling signal is loudest. There will be specific triggers, a bill, a silence, a comparison to someone else's success, that reliably activate the fear sentence. There will be specific words you speak most often from the poverty signal. The 7 days of tracking are not about judgment. They are about the kind of precise diagnosis that Wattles would have called the beginning of the real work. Because a pattern you have mapped is a pattern you can correct, and a pattern you can correct is a pattern that is already losing its authority. Correct every contradiction with the practice. I send one signal only. Wealth moves toward me. Then take one small aligned action from the state of supply. A message sent with confidence, a piece of work published without apology, a financial account reviewed with the calm of a person who expects increase, a request made clearly and without the hedging of a poverty identity. One action per correction. The action does not have to be large, it has to be aligned. And it has to be taken from the state of supply rather than from the urgency of fear. 7 days of this practice will not make the work complete, but they will shift the dominant signal measurably, and that shift will be felt in ways that will make the practice worth continuing beyond the 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, you will have a different relationship with the cancelling signal than you have today. Not because it will be gone, but because you will have faced it repeatedly and corrected it repeatedly and found that you are capable of the correction. That discovery, the lived knowledge that the fear sentence can be caught and replaced, and that the wealth signal can be returned to even in the most challenging moments, is itself a shift in the dominant impression. The signal that was formerly dominated by fear will have spent 7 days being practiced toward certainty, and certainty practiced for 7 days is a foundation that did not exist before you began. After the 7 days, come back, leave your experience in the comments. Tell this community what you found. What was the dominant fear sentence in your life? How many times did you need to correct it? What small aligned action did you take, and what happened when you took it from the state of supply rather than from fear? The comment section below this video is not just an engagement mechanism, it is a space where wealth signals meet, where people who have heard this teaching and taken it seriously report back with the evidence of the law operating in their specific lives. Come back with your 7-day report. The community that is building around this teaching needs to hear it. This teaching began with a truth you may have felt but never been able to articulate. You are broadcasting a signal every day, not just in your best moments, in all of them. In the quiet moments when no one is watching and the bills have arrived and the account has not changed and the fear has been present longer than the faith. You were broadcasting then too, and now you know what that signal was doing. You know the mechanism. You know the law. You know the 5 elements of the signal and which of them has been carrying contradiction. You know the cancelling sentence and how to catch it. You know the correction practice and how to apply it. You know the identity of the steady transmitter and how to claim it and return to it every day. The universe does not only hear what you ask for, it responds to what you consistently transmit. You have been transmitting something. Now you are choosing, deliberately and with the full weight of the Master's law behind you, to transmit something different, something unified, something that does not hold faith in one hand and fear in the other, but holds the wealth signal in both hands, clearly and steadily, and with the growing certainty of one who has understood the law and is choosing to live by it. This is not naivety. This is the certain way. And the certain way held with dominance produces the certain result that Wattles described and that every sincere student of these laws has confirmed in their own life. The source is not withholding from you. Supply has not been permanently rerouted away from you. The channels are not permanently closed. What has been operating is a signal that has been divided by fear and contradiction, and the cancelling sentence, and the false safety trap, and the rejected deliveries, and the poverty speech. And all of those things, every single one of them, can be corrected through the practice you now have in your hands. Not in theory, in daily life, one correction at a time, one return to the signal at a time, one aligned action at a time, until the dominant impression that reaches the formless substance is no longer a question or a contradiction, but a command. Subscribe to the Master's legacy and stay in this teaching. The laws revealed in this video are not isolated. They are one thread in a much larger tapestry of spiritual wisdom that this channel exists to preserve and interpret. There are more teachings coming, more laws to name, more hidden errors to diagnose, more corrections to practice, more masters to hear from. If this teaching has opened something in you, if you have recognized yourself in the divided signal and felt the truth of the law we have been studying, then this channel has more of what you are looking for. Subscribe, return, bring others who are ready. The Master's legacy is here to serve the sincere student of invisible law. When your signal becomes one, money no longer receives confusion. It receives direction. That is the closing law. That is the circular return to everything this teaching opened with. You were always broadcasting. Now you know what you are broadcasting. Now you know how to make it one signal, clear and steady and aligned with the wealth that the formless substance has always been prepared to deliver. The work is yours. The law is certain. The signal is in your hands. Send it with certainty. And let the supply follow the only path it has ever known how to follow. The path of the clear, steady, unified signal of one who knows the law and trusts it without waiting for permission from the visible world.